There are questions we avoid because we fear the answers, questions that touch eternity, judgment, purification, and the hidden reality of what happens to the soul after death. But Saint Faustina was not afraid of these questions. She carried them into prayer, into suffering, into her mystical encounters, right to the threshold where heaven and earth meet. And one day she asked the souls in purgatory a question most of us would never dare to whisper: "What is your greatest suffering here?" It was not curiosity, it was compassion. It was the ache of a heart that loved deeply, that could not endure the thought of forgotten souls suffering in silence. But the answer she received was not what she expected, and it is not what you would expect either. Before we reach that answer, let me ask you something sincerely. Have you ever wondered what souls experience in purgatory, not in the abstract, but in their deepest interior reality? What it feels like to stand between heaven's light and the residue of earthly imperfection, to belong to God fully, yet still carry what prevents the soul from entering His presence? Most people imagine fire, some imagine loneliness, others imagine time itself stretched painfully, but Saint Faustina's revelation goes much deeper than imagery. She discovered a suffering not of the senses, but of the heart, a suffering that reveals something terrifying, humbling, and profoundly true about the human soul. Yet here is what makes this moment extraordinary. The souls did not answer her with despair, they answered her with truth. Faustina said she saw souls longing for God with an intensity the human mind cannot comprehend, souls who knew they were saved, yet felt the unbearable distance caused by their unfinished purification. Their suffering was not punishment, it was consequence, not cruelty but holiness, not abandonment but mercy. And when she asked them what their greatest pain was, the answer pierced her heart, because it reveals something every person alive today should consider deeply. Something about how we live, how we love, how we approach God, and how we ignore what matters most. In this first part, I want you to sit with one truth. Faustina did not go looking for fear, she went looking for understanding, and she found a reality that confronts every soul. The answer she received is terrifying, not because it is grotesque, but because it is true. It touches the core of what we forget, neglect, underestimate, and postpone. And it reveals that the greatest suffering after death is not what people imagine, but we will get to that. The journey into this revelation requires stillness, honesty, and an open heart, because what Faustina learned does not simply teach us about purgatory, it teaches us about ourselves. Before Saint Faustina heard the soul speak, she first felt something, an atmosphere, a weight, an ache that was not her own. It was the overwhelming realization that purgatory is not a place of chaos, nor of despair, nor of punishment as humans imagine it. It is a place of order, of necessity, of holy longing. And most striking of all, it is profoundly silent. Not the silence of peace, the silence of separation. Imagine a soul that has seen a glimpse of God's glory, even for an instant. Imagine that soul now burning, not with fire, but with desire. A desire impossibly intense, impossibly pure, impossibly consuming. This longing is joy and agony at the same time. Joy because the soul knows it belongs to God. Agony because it cannot yet reach Him. This is where Faustina entered, not as a curious observer, but as someone being shown a spiritual reality that humanity rarely contemplates. Let me ask you something deeply. Have you ever loved someone so intensely that being away from them, even briefly, felt almost unbearable? Have you ever longed for reconciliation with someone after a rupture so deep that the waiting itself felt like a slow wound? Now magnify that feeling beyond human capacity, and you begin to understand the atmosphere Faustina walked into. The souls were not screaming, they were not writhing, they were not begging for escape. They were aching, with an ache that is sharper than any earthly pain, the ache of knowing the one you were made for, the one who is your completion, your joy, your rest, and yet still being unable to touch Him. Not because God rejects them, not because He distances Himself, but because their soul is not yet ready to bear His full glory without being consumed by it. Faustina described them as being suspended in a light they could not yet enter, like standing at the threshold of a doorway too radiant to cross. The pain is not external, it is interior. The soul burns with love, and the burn purifies. But that purification hurts. And this is the terrifying truth most people never consider. The greatest suffering in purgatory is that souls see how much they could have loved God, and how little they chose to. They see every wasted grace, every ignored whisper, every postponed conversion, every moment when God invited them closer, and they stayed at a distance, not out of malice, out of distraction, out of pride, out of delay. The terror is not God's anger. The terror is the soul's clarity. For the first time, they understand their own choices fully, and they long to be made clean no matter the cost. And in that longing, in that holy ache, Faustina approached them and asked the question. Their response would reveal a suffering far deeper than fire. There are moments in mystical encounters when the atmosphere shifts, when something unseen begins to communicate in a way words cannot fully capture. Faustina described this shift with profound simplicity. The souls turned toward her, not physically, but spiritually. As if her presence, her compassion, her question had awakened an interior movement among them. This was the moment when the silence of purgatory broke, not with noise, but with truth. She had asked them the question no one asks, "What is your greatest suffering?" And before the answer came, she sensed a sorrow so deep, so universal, that it felt like the entire place was breathing one shared ache. But here is where the experience becomes astonishing. The souls did not hesitate. They did not debate. They did not offer a list. They gave a single answer, unanimous, piercing, unforgettable. Let me ask you something before we reveal it. If you were to imagine the greatest suffering of purgatory, what would you guess? The fire, the longing, the separation, the weight of purification, regret, loneliness? All of these are real. All of these are painful. All of these are part of the soul's healing, but none of them is the greatest suffering. Faustina expected something intense, something dramatic, something unimaginable. Instead, the answer the souls gave her was so simple and yet so terrifying that it shook her understanding of the spiritual life. They told her, "Our greatest suffering is longing for God, not fire, not punishment, not the purification itself. Longing, but not the longing you and I know on earth, not the longing of absence or desire or waiting. This longing is agony because the soul has tasted God, has seen Him, has known Him, has recognized the one for whom it was created, and now stands just short of reaching Him. Imagine standing on the edge of paradise with no veil between you and divine love, and yet being unable to enter. Not because God bars the door, but because your soul is not yet able to withstand the completeness of His presence. This longing consumes, it purifies, it burns like truth on the deepest layer of being. Faustina realized in that instant that purgatory is not the suffering of divine rejection. It is the suffering of divine nearness. The souls are closer to God than they ever were on earth, and yet their unfinished love keeps them just outside the fullness they crave. And here is the most terrifying part. Every soul in purgatory knows that this suffering could have been smaller if they had loved God more while they lived. It is not torment inflicted on them. It is the natural ache of a heart finally seeing everything clearly. Faustina would later say that this truth changes not only how we view purgatory, but how we should view our daily life. Every moment we delay conversion, every grace we ignore, every act of love we postpone, becomes another layer the soul must burn through to reach God. The souls told her the truth plainly. Their greatest suffering is the unbearable longing for God, and this is only the beginning of what they revealed. There is something haunting about hearing the souls of purgatory speak. Their words do not echo like human voices. They resonate like truth whispered into the deepest layers of the heart. After revealing their greatest suffering, the unbearable longing for God, they shared something else with Faustina, something equally unsettling, yet strangely consoling. It was the truth about why they suffer. Most people imagine purgatory as a place of dread, a fearful anticipation before heaven. But the souls expressed something profoundly different. Their suffering, though intense, though consuming, though sharper than any earthly pain, is accompanied by an unshakable certainty that we on earth rarely taste. They know they are loved, not vaguely, not theoretically, not as a doctrine, but with clarity so absolute it leaves no room for doubt. Let me ask you something personal. Have you ever had a moment, even brief, when you felt loved by God so deeply that all fear vanished for an instant? A moment of pure trust, pure surrender, pure belonging. Now imagine that every soul in purgatory lives in that state constantly, even while suffering. This is the paradox Faustina learned. The souls suffer more than we can imagine, yet they trust more perfectly than we can understand. And this trust changes everything. They reveal to her that although their longing is painful beyond words, it is not despair. There is no rebellion in them, no anger, no bitterness. Their suffering is not the suffering of fear. It is the suffering of love, stretching the soul to its final capacity. That is what terrified Faustina, not their agony, their willingness. They told her that the soul in purgatory would rather stay in purification for 1,000 years than enter heaven with a single residue of selfishness, pride, or impurity. Not because God demands perfection, but because love does. This is the truth most people avoid. In the blazing clarity of purgatory, the soul sees God as He is and sees itself as it was. And in that vision, the soul chooses purification. It longs to be clean. It longs to be worthy of the love it now perceives without distortion. It longs to burn away anything that ever kept it from God. Faustina realized something extraordinary. The souls suffer because they love God more than they ever did on earth. And from that love comes the second revelation they shared. The greatest torment is longing for God, but the greatest consolation is knowing the longing will end. There is no uncertainty in purgatory, no fear of damnation, no doubt about God's mercy, no confusion about their destiny. Every soul knows, I will see Him, I will belong to Him, I will be fully His. And that certainty is so overwhelming that they endure the fire with peace, a peace that terrifies precisely because it is so holy. This is what Faustina understood standing among them. Their suffering is purifying, their longing is sanctifying, their hope is unwavering, and their message to the living contains a warning that we must not ignore. There are moments in mystical revelations when the focus shifts. Up to this point, the souls had shown Faustina what they endure. Now they turned their attention to us, the living, the ones still able to choose, the ones who still shape eternity with every decision. Faustina sensed this shift instantly. It was as though the entire atmosphere of purgatory leaned forward, urging her to listen. The suffering she had witnessed was great, yes. The longing was overwhelming. But what the souls told her next carried a weight far more sobering. They wanted her to warn us, not about punishment, not about fire, not about fear, but about something far more subtle, something far more dangerous: neglect. Let me ask you something honestly. How many times have you delayed prayer because you were tired? How many times have you postponed an act of love because it felt inconvenient? How many times have you sensed God's nudge in your conscience and told yourself, later, when life calms down, when I'm ready? This is the tragedy the souls wanted Faustina to understand. The majority of their suffering did not come from grave sins, but from ordinary moments of grace they ignored. These were not wicked people. These were not hardened sinners. These were souls who loved God and but loved Him lazily, sporadically, partially, distractedly. And now, in purgatory, they see every lost opportunity with excruciating clarity. They told Faustina that the smallest acts of love on earth, the ones we consider insignificant, the ones we forget immediately after doing them, become jewels in eternal life. While the moments of spiritual negligence, the times we chose comfort over conversion, noise over prayer, self over surrender, become the very shadows that must be purified away. This was their warning. Do not waste the grace you are given. Faustina felt the urgency behind those words. The souls were not condemning the living, They were pleading with us. Every moment of earthly life contains offers of grace, opportunities to love, to trust, to forgive, to detach, to pray, to surrender. And each one carries eternal weight. The terrifying part is this: we rarely notice these moments while they are happening. We wait for big signs, big conversions, big emotions, but God is visiting the soul dozens of times a day through tiny invitations that go ignored. And in purgatory, the souls see it. They see what each moment could have become. They see what they refused. They see how little was required of them to reach God sooner. They see the cost of spiritual delay. Faustina understood. Their suffering is not from God's cruelty. It is from their own clarity. And their message to us was simple and devastating. Do now what will give you joy then. Do not postpone love. Do not delay surrender. Respond to grace while you still can. What they revealed next to Faustina is the culmination of all these truths, the final shocking answer to her question, and the reason this message must never be forgotten. There are revelations that illuminate the soul, and there are revelations that confront it so directly that they leave no room for excuses. What the souls in purgatory asked of Saint Faustina falls into this second category. After showing her their longing, after revealing the nature of their suffering, after warning her about the danger of spiritual neglect, they made a final request. Not for release, not for relief, not for mercy. They already had that. Their request was far more sobering. They asked Faustina, "Tell the living that we can no longer help ourselves." And then came the most terrifying part. "What you refuse to do now, we must endure later." Those words are not threats. They are truth spoken without veil. The souls were not frightening her. They were awakening her. Let me ask you something with complete honesty. If you suddenly saw with absolute clarity what every small prayer, every act of love, every moment of forgiveness, every sacrifice, every avoided sin really meant, would you live the same way you do now? This is the terror Faustina experienced. Not horror, but truth so sharp that it cuts through illusions. The souls told her that they burn with longing for God because they resisted loving Him fully on earth, that they ache because they postponed conversion again and again, that their purification is necessary precisely because they ignored the small invitations of grace, that they now depend on the prayers of the living because they can no longer merit anything for themselves. This is why their request to Faustina was so urgent. Do not waste what we wasted. Do not delay what we delayed. Do not postpone what we postponed. They begged her to tell us that the smallest act of love done today prevents oceans of suffering later, that a single sincere prayer now carries more weight than thousands offered for oneself after death, that every ignored whisper of God becomes a mountain requiring purification, that the path to heaven is not difficult, but procrastination makes it so. And then they revealed the truth that completes their terrifying answer. Our greatest suffering is longing for God, but our second greatest suffering is knowing how easily this could have been less. That is what shook Faustina, not the fire, not the darkness, not the purification, but the realization that the difference between a painful purification and a swift one lies in choices made in ordinary days, the days we treat as spiritually insignificant. In the end, the souls asked Faustina two things. 1. To tell the world that purgatory is real and that it is mercy, not punishment. 2. To urge the living to love God now, respond to grace now, convert now. Because once we cross the threshold of death, the time for merit ends. The time for purification begins, and the soul must complete what it refused to begin on earth. This is the terrifying answer. What Saint Faustina asked the souls in purgatory revealed not only their suffering, but our responsibility. The message is not meant to frighten, it is meant to awaken. While you breathe, you can change everything. Every prayer matters. Every act of love becomes eternal. Every moment of surrender shortens the fire of purification. Faustina left purgatory with a truth she carried the rest of her life. God is merciful, but time is not.